The light fixture in Medbay 7 buzzed like a dying wasp trapped inside a tin can. It was the kind of flickering, half-dead glow that made everything look sick, especially the thing on the table. Dr. Arisht of the Galactic Medical Exchange had spent 17 cycles traveling between systems, patching up species that evolved under pink suns and blue giants, creatures with copper blood and silicon bones and respiratory systems that ran on liquefied methane. He had seen horrors. He had seen miracles. He had never seen a patient walk into his clinic with a piece of industrial machinery lodged in his arm and ask for a standard patch job like it was a splinter. The human's name was Wyatt. That was all Arisht had managed to get out of him before the man had slumped onto the examination table and extended his left arm with the casual irritation of someone handing over a grocery list. His forearm was split open from the elbow to the wrist. Inside the wound, visible through layers of shredded meat and yellowed fat, was a twisted shard of cobalt steel alloy. The kind used in cargo loader pistons, the kind that moved under several atmospheres of hydraulic pressure before shearing off and becoming a hypersonic piece of shrapnel. Arisht's primary manipulator appendages had frozen mid-reach. His secondary heart, the backup pump that kept his hemoglobin alternative circulating through his lower thorax, had stuttered. He had spent 3 years studying the Galactic Standard Medical Databases section on Sol origin species. He had read the warnings. He had dismissed them as exaggeration. No biology could be that hostile to itself and still function. The human was still talking. Something about a shift rotation. Something about a foreman who owed him credits. Arisht wasn't listening. He was watching the wound. It was already clotting, not with the slow, gel-like sealant he expected from carbon-based life. This was aggressive. The edges of the tear were pulling inward with visible tension, as if the skin remembered where it belonged and was trying to force reality to comply. The blood, dark red, almost black in the buzzing light, was thickening at the edges into something that looked less like biological matter and more like wet clay. "You need to hold still," Arisht said, his translator adjusting his natural resonance into something approximating standard. "This is not a patch job. This is a systemic shock event." Wyatt blinked at him. He had pale eyes, the color of storm clouds over a polluted sea. "It's a cut. Stitch it. Glue it. Whatever. I've got a double shift, starting in 4 hours." Arisht's primary heart began to beat faster. He didn't have a word for what he was feeling. Fear wasn't precise enough. This was something else, the deep, instinctive recognition that he was standing next to a piece of equipment that should not exist. He activated his med scanner, the ring of crystalline sensors extending from the ceiling and descending around the human's arm. The machine hummed. Then it choked. The readout spooled across his retinal display in a cascade of red error flags. Arisht read them once, then he read them again. Then he stopped breathing. If you love grounded sci-fi, stick around to find out what happens when a galactic healer realizes the thing sitting in his chair isn't a patient. It's a warning. The human's blood was iron-based. Arisht knew this intellectually. The database had said as much, but knowing and seeing were different experiences, separated by the vast gulf between theory and encounter. The scanner was detecting iron concentrations that should have been lethal, not elevated, not abnormal, industrial. The human's blood carried more free iron than the coolant fluid in a Class 3 fusion reactor. And it wasn't sequestered properly. It was bound inside complex protein structures that the scanner couldn't even begin to categorize. Structures that looked less like evolved biology and more like engineered alloys. Your hemoglobin, Arisht said, his voice coming out thinner than he intended. It's metallic. Wyatt glanced down at his own arm like he was checking a weather report. Yeah, that's what carries oxygen. No, Arisht said. No, it isn't. Iron is a heavy metal. It's toxic. It catalyzes free radical formation. It shreds cellular membranes. Nothing carries oxygen with iron. Nothing. You use copper. You use cobalt. You use dissolved hydrocarbons. You don't use iron. The human shrugged with his good shoulder. Works for us. Arisht's scanner was still screaming. He dismissed the alerts and forced the machine to run a full-spectrum analysis. The results took 3 full seconds to compile, an eternity for a device that normally processed a complete biological workup in less than a heartbeat. When the data finally loaded, Arisht felt his knees lock. The human's cellular walls were reinforced, not with the flexible proteins found in every other carbon-based species he'd ever encountered, with cholesterol. Massive, crystalline concentrations of a lipid that should have turned his arteries into stone. But it wasn't clogging anything. It was structural. The human cells weren't soft sacs of fluid. They were rigid, fortified chambers designed to withstand pressure differentials that would rupture any other biological container. "You're a walking pressure vessel," Arisht whispered. "You gonna stitch me up or give me a poetry reading?" Arisht ignored him. He was scrolling deeper into the data now, past the surface readings and into the genetic architecture beneath. The human's DNA wasn't just different. It was damaged. No, not damaged. It was scarred. Massive sections of the genome showed evidence of ancient viral insertions, retroviral fragments that had been co-opted and repurposed into functional code. The human body wasn't a pure product of evolution. It was a patchwork, a boneyard of old battles, each victory written directly into the blueprint of every cell. "You have endogenous retroviruses," Arisht said. 8% of your genome is viral. Wyatt's eyes narrowed slightly. "You're saying I'm part virus? I'm saying your ancestors survived things that should have killed them repeatedly. And instead of dying, they ate the attackers. They absorbed them. They turned the weapons of their enemies into tools." Arisht looked up from the scanner. His manipulators were trembling. "What kind of world produces something like you?" For the first time, the human seemed to actually consider the question. His face, which Arisht had initially read as simple exhaustion, revealed something else underneath, something old, something that had seen things. "It's called Earth," Wyatt said. "You ever heard of it?" "The Death World," Arisht said. The word tasted like ash. "Yeah, that's the one." Wyatt shifted on the table, wincing as the movement pulled at the wound. "Listen, Doc, I appreciate the biology lesson, but I've got a coagulant patch in my pocket. If you're not going to help me, I'll do it myself and you can bill my account for the consult." Arisht's training overrode his fear. He reached for the surgical kit, his manipulators moving through the sterile field with practiced precision. But his mind was still racing, still trying to reconcile the creature in front of him with everything he knew about life in the galaxy. The Galactic Medical Exchange had classified Earth as a class 1-2 Death World, the highest rating on the scale, the kind of planet where gravity crushed, atmosphere poisoned, and the native life had evolved competition strategies so aggressive they made war look like courtship. But the rating system was supposed to be about environment, about the planet itself. No one had ever considered what it meant for the species that crawled out of that environment until now. "The iron," Arisht said as he began cleaning the wound. The human didn't flinch, didn't even tense. "It's not just in your blood, it's everywhere. Your bones, your muscles, your organs. You're not carrying metal, you're made of it." "Calcium phosphate," Wyatt said. "Bones are calcium phosphate, not metal. Trace elements," Arisht countered. "I'm seeing manganese, copper, zinc, molybdenum. Your body stockpiles heavy metals like a hoarder. Any other species would be dead from heavy metal poisoning before reaching sexual maturity. You've built an entire biochemistry around them." The coagulant patch was applied, Arisht's own blend, standard for most carbon-based species in the sector. He watched as the human's blood reacted to it, not with the slow absorption he expected, but with what looked almost like aggression. The platelets, which the scanner had identified as bizarrely oversized and oddly shaped, swarmed the patch and began restructuring it. Within seconds, the synthetic material had been broken down and rebuilt into something that matched the human's own biology. Arisht stepped back. "Your body just ate my medicine," he said. Wyatt looked at his arm. The wound was already closing, not healing. That would take days, maybe weeks, but closing. The edges had pulled together over the coagulant mass, and a thin film of something clear and viscous was already forming over the surface. "Yeah," the human said. "It does that." The door to Medbay 7 hissed open. Foreman Voss, a Grenthon with the thick armored hide of a deep-sea predator, filled the frame. His species didn't have expressive faces. Their emotions were communicated through the shifting patterns of bioluminescent spots along their necks. But Arisht had worked with enough Grenthon to read the tension in the way Voss held his massive shoulders. "Wyatt," Voss said, his translator rendering his subsonic rumbles into standard. "The loader assembly is down again. I need you on the floor." He flexed his left arm experimentally, hissing slightly at the residual pain, then nodded. "Give me 5 minutes. You have 2. Voss turned and left. The door didn't close fast enough to hide the way the foreman's spots flickered, a pattern Arisht had learned to associate with unease, fear even. Of what? Of a worker with a fresh wound and a tired expression? Wyatt pulled a grimy jumpsuit from the chair next to the table and began working his good arm through the sleeve. The injured arm followed more slowly but deliberately. Without hesitation. "You can't go back to work," Arisht said. "You need observation. Your body is processing the injury at an accelerated rate. That kind of metabolic activity is normal," Wyatt finished. He zipped the jumpsuit halfway and reached for his boots. "For me, for us, we heal fast because we break fast. It's a trade-off." Arisht's scanner was still running. He glanced at the readout and felt his stomach, all 3 chambers of it, clench. The human's metabolic rate had increased by 40% since he'd entered the room. His core temperature had risen 2 degrees. His white blood cell count had quadrupled. "You're running a fever," Arisht said. "That's the immune system. It's working." Wyatt stood up. He was tall, not exceptionally so by Galactic standards, but there was something about the way he occupied space. Dense, grounded, like he was heavier than he should be. "Your bones," Arisht said suddenly. The thought had been nagging at him since the scanner had first reported the anomaly. The density. "You're not from a standard gravity world, are you?" Wyatt paused at the door. "Earth's gravity is 9.8 meters per second squared. Arisht did the conversion in his head. His primary heart stopped again. 9.8 was almost twice the galactic average. Twice. The human had evolved under twice the gravitational load that most species experienced. His skeleton wasn't just dense, it was engineered for constant crushing pressure. "You're a deep gravity species," Arisht said. "You shouldn't be able to function in standard environments. You should be slow, clumsy. Your joints should be failing." "We adapt," Wyatt said. "That's what we do." He left. The door closed behind him with a soft hiss, and Arisht was alone with a scanner full of impossible data and a heart that wouldn't stop racing. The med bay light continued to buzz. The cargo bay of the GMS Relentless was a cathedral of industry. Arisht had seen it from the observation deck during his initial tour. The vast open space, the stacks of shipping containers reaching toward the distant ceiling, the constant motion of loaders and haulers and workers moving in carefully choreographed patterns. It had seemed efficient then, impressive even. Now, standing at the entrance with a med kit in his manipulators and a knot of professional obligation in his throat, it looked like a death trap. The human was already on the floor. Arisht spotted him near the primary loader assembly, a massive piece of machinery that dominated the center of the cargo bay. The loader was supposed to be stationary, anchored to the deck by 6 hydraulic legs that could lock into place with enough force to crush a small vehicle. But something had gone wrong. One of the legs had failed, and the entire assembly had tilted, spilling a cascade of cargo containers across the floor and pinning 3 workers against the far wall. Wyatt wasn't pinned, he was underneath the loader. Not crushed. Arisht could see that much from the entrance. The human had wedged himself into the narrow gap between the tilted machinery and the deck, his shoulders braced against the hydraulic housing and his boots planted against a fallen container. He was holding the loader up, not stopping it from falling further. It had already fallen. He was holding it in place so the pinned workers could be extracted. Arisht's mind refused to process what his eyes were seeing. The loader assembly weighed approximately 40 metric tons. Even accounting for the fact that it was resting on one functional leg and the edge of a shipping container, the portion that Wyatt was supporting had to be at least 12 tons. 12 tons of industrial machinery pressing down on a single human being who had, 40 minutes earlier, been bleeding from an open wound. The human's jumpsuit was torn across the shoulders. His boots were skidding backward on the deck, millimeter by millimeter, as the loader continued to settle. His face was red, not flushed with embarrassment, red with blood, capillaries bursting under the strain. His teeth were visible, clenched so hard that Arisht could see the cords of muscle standing out along his jaw. "Stabilizers!" someone shouted. Arisht recognized the voice. A Xylan technician, one of the few species on the crew with enough manipulator dexterity to work on the loader's systems. "We need to lock the hydraulics before." The loader shifted. Metal screamed against metal. A shower of sparks erupted from somewhere above, and the entire assembly dropped another centimeter. Wyatt's boots skidded again. His shoulders were pressed so hard against the housing that his collarbones were visible through the skin. "He can't hold it," someone else said. "A Grentham, not Voss. One of the loaders. No one can hold that. Get him out of there before. He's the only thing keeping it from falling on the others." Voss's voice cut through the chaos. The foreman was standing on top of a crushed container, his bioluminescent spots cycling through a pattern of pure, unfiltered panic. "If he moves, we lose the 3 under the wall." Arisht pushed through the crowd. His medical training told him to stay back. to let the rescue workers do their jobs. But something else, something deeper and older, was pulling him forward. He needed to see. He needed to understand. Up close, the human looked worse. Blood was running from Wyatt's nose. Not dripping, running. A steady stream of dark red that splattered onto the deck between his boots and mixed with the hydraulic fluid leaking from the damaged leg. His eyes were open, but they weren't focused on anything. He had gone somewhere else, some internal space where pain was just data to be processed and ignored. "Wyatt," Arisht shouted, "can you hear me?" The human's jaw unclenched for a fraction of a second. "Yeah," he said. The word was barely audible over the groaning of the loader. "Get the stabilizers in place. I've got maybe 2 minutes before my shoulders give." Arisht looked at the loader's damaged leg. The hydraulic system was compromised, fluid bleeding out in a steady stream, reducing the pressure that was supposed to support the assembly's weight. The remaining legs were straining, but without the fourth point of contact, the whole structure was slowly, inexorably collapsing. 2 minutes isn't enough," Arisht said. Wyatt's eyes found him. For a moment, the human looked almost amused. "Then make it enough." Arisht turned to the technicians. They were frozen, their species' natural caution overriding their training. He understood. He felt the same paralysis. The loader was a death trap. Every instinct told them to run, to get clear, to let the machinery fall and deal with the consequences afterward. But the human wasn't running. "The stabilizers," Arisht said, forcing authority into his voice. "How do we engage them manually?" The Zilan technician stared at him. "We can't. The control panel is crushed. We'd have to access the hydraulic manifold directly, and it's behind the loader," Arisht finished. "Under the damaged section." Yes, Arisht looked at the gap beneath the tilted assembly. It was narrow, maybe 30 centimeters at its highest point. Too small for a Grenthon, too small for most of the species on the crew. But a human. He looked at Wyatt. The human's arm had been split open an hour ago. His shoulders were holding 12 tons of industrial machinery. And he was still conscious, still thinking, still making calculations behind those storm cloud eyes. "How long can you hold it if the pressure changes?" Arisht asked. Wyatt's brow furrowed. "What pressure if someone crawls underneath, past you, into the manifold? If they engage the stabilizers from the inside, the load will shift. The hydraulics will reroute. It might buy us enough time to extract the pinned workers." The human was quiet for a long moment. The loader groaned. A new crack appeared in the deck near his left boot. "I don't know," he said finally. "Never done this before?" "Then guess." Wyatt's jaw tightened again. 30 seconds, maybe a minute. If the load shifts too fast, I lose it. The whole thing comes down. How long would it take someone to reach the manifold? Depends on who. Arisht looked around the cargo bay. The crew had backed away from the loader, forming a loose semicircle of terrified faces and flickering bioluminescence. None of them were moving toward the gap. None of them were even considering it. He looked down at himself, at his own small frame, his delicate manipulators, his thin carapace that had evolved on a gentle world with low gravities and no predators larger than a house cat. "Show me where it is," he said. Wyatt's eyes widened, just slightly, just for a moment. Then the exhaustion returned, settling over his features like a mask. "Doc, you're not built for this." "Neither are you," Arisht said. "But you're doing it anyway." He dropped to the deck and began crawling toward the gap. The space was smaller than it had looked from the outside. Arisht's carapace scraped against the underside of the loader, and he felt the immense weight pressing down from above. Not directly. Not yet. But the proximity alone was enough to trigger every survival instinct he possessed. His primary heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. His secondary heart had gone into overdrive, pumping his copper-based blood through his system so fast he could taste the metallic tang of it on his breathing pores. The human was above him. Wyatt's shoulders were still braced against the hydraulic housing, his body positioned just to the left of the narrow passage Arisht was trying to navigate. The human's nose was still bleeding. Drops of iron-rich blood fell onto Arisht's carapace, warm and shockingly heavy. Each drop felt like a small stone. "Keep moving," Wyatt said. His voice was strained now, the words forced out between clenched teeth. "The manifold is about 3 meters past me. You'll see the access panel. It's the one with the red handle." Arisht crawled faster. His manipulators found purchase on the greasy deck, slipping occasionally on patches of hydraulic fluid and something else, something warmer, stickier. He didn't look down to identify it. The loader shifted. Arisht felt the change more than heard it. A subtle redistribution of weight, a new tension in the groaning metal above him. Wyatt grunted. The sound was short, sharp, and entirely involuntary. A sound of pure, unfiltered effort. 30 seconds, the human said. Maybe less. Move. Arisht moved. He reached the manifold in what felt like both an eternity and a heartbeat. The access panel was exactly where Wyatt had described it, a red handle protruding from a recessed housing, surrounded by warning labels in a dozen different languages. Arisht grabbed the handle and pulled. Nothing happened. He pulled again, harder. The handle didn't budge. His manipulators, designed for delicate medical procedures and fine motor control, weren't strong enough to engage the manual release. He tried bracing his feet against the deck, using his whole body for leverage, but the handle remained locked in place. "Problem?" Wyatt's voice was thinner now. The strain was bleeding through. "The release is stuck," Arisht said. "I can't hit it." "What?" "Hit the housing." "Right below the handle. Hard." Arisht looked at his manipulators. They were going to break if he struck anything harder than a soft surface. But he didn't have any other options. He drew back his primary manipulator and struck the housing with as much force as he could muster. The impact sent a shock of pain through his entire arm. Something cracked. Not the housing, but one of the small bones in his manipulator. He bit down on a scream and struck again. The handle moved. Not much, just a fraction of a centimeter. But it moved. Arisht grabbed it with both manipulators and pulled with everything he had, ignoring the screaming pain in his fractured bone, ignoring the blood now seeping from a dozen small cuts on his carapace, ignoring the mounting terror that told him to run, to flee, to save himself. The handle slid home. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the loader shuddered. A deep, resonant hum filled the cargo bay, and the pressure above Arisht's back suddenly lessened. The stabilizers had engaged. The hydraulic system was rerouting, redistributing the weight across the remaining functional legs. But the load was still shifting. Arisht heard Wyatt grunt again, longer this time, a sustained effort that ended in a gasping breath. The human was still holding his position, still keeping the loader from collapsing entirely, but something had changed. The weight distribution was different now. The forces acting on his body had shifted. "Get out," Wyatt said. His voice was barely a whisper. "Get them out." Now, Arisht crawled backward, dragging his damaged manipulator behind him. He emerged from the gap just as the rescue team reached the pinned workers. Voss was there, his massive arms pulling a Xylan loader free from the debris. Another Grenthon was working on the second worker, a small, fragile-looking creature that Arisht didn't recognize. The third worker was a human. Arisht hadn't noticed her before. She had been hidden behind a stack of fallen containers, her legs pinned under a section of the loader's housing. She was young, younger than Wyatt, with darker skin and short-propped hair that was matted with blood. Her eyes were open. She was conscious, and she was watching Wyatt with an expression that Arisht couldn't read. "Mira," Wyatt said. His voice was stronger now, but there was something new in it. Something soft. "You okay?" The woman, Mira, tried to move her legs. She couldn't. The loader housing was pressing down on her thighs, and while the stabilizers had stopped the assembly from falling further, they hadn't lifted the weight that was already pinning her. "Can't feel my legs," she said. Her voice was calm, too calm. The calm of someone who had learned not to panic because panic never helped. Wyatt's eyes closed, just for a moment. When they opened again, something had hardened behind them. "Voss," he said, "get everyone clear, now." The foreman's bioluminescence flared. "We're not leaving you. You're not leaving me. You're clearing the area. I'm going to lift this thing." Silence. Complete, absolute silence. Even the loader seemed to stop groaning, as if the machinery itself was waiting to hear what came next. "You can't lift 40 tons, Voss said. I'm not going to lift 40 tons. I'm going to shift it, just enough to get her out." Wyatt looked down at Arisht, who was still kneeling near the gap, his fractured manipulator cradled against his chest. "Doc, when I move, she's going to bleed. A lot. The weight is the only thing keeping the vessels clamped. Once it's off, the blood will come. You need to be ready." Arisht stared at him. "You'll kill yourself." "Maybe." Wyatt's shoulders shifted. The loader groaned in response. "But she won't die down here, not while I'm still standing." He moved, not quickly. There was no explosive burst of strength, no dramatic flexing of muscles. Wyatt simply straightened his legs and pushed. The loader lifted. Not much, just a few centimeters. Just enough to create a gap between the housing and the deck. Mira screamed. It was the first time Arisht had heard her make a sound of pain, and it cut through him like a blade. Blood was pouring from her crushed legs, dark and thick, pooling on the deck and spreading toward the drain grates. Arisht scrambled toward her, his medical training taking over, despite the pain in his manipulator, despite the terror that still gripped his heart. He clamped the first vessel, then the second, then the third. His damaged manipulator was nearly useless, but he had 3 others, and he used them all, working with a speed and precision he hadn't known he possessed. Behind him, the loader was still moving. Wyatt was walking. Not running. He couldn't run under that kind of load. But he was moving backward, step by step, his boots skidding slightly on the blood-slicked deck. The loader was shifting with him, the damaged legs scraping against the deck, sending up sparks that illuminated the cargo bay in brief, blinding flashes. "Clear!" Voss shouted. "She's clear! Drop it!" Wyatt dropped. The loader crashed down onto the deck with an impact that shook the entire cargo bay. Containers toppled. A support beam cracked somewhere above, but the assembly was stable now, resting on its remaining legs, the stabilizers holding it in place. Wyatt was on his knees. His jumpsuit was shredded. His shoulders were raw, the skin abraded down to the muscle in several places. His nose was still bleeding, and there was blood in his mouth, and his left arm, the one that had been injured an hour ago, was hanging at an unnatural angle. But he was breathing. He was breathing, and he was looking at Mira, and when she reached out and grabbed his hand, he held on. Arisht finished clamping the last vessel and sat back on his haunches. His manipulators were covered in human blood. It was warm and heavy, and it smelled like iron and salt, and something else, something that reminded him of thunderstorms and deep oceans and worlds that had never known peace. He looked around the cargo bay. The crew was staring. Not at the fallen loader, not at the damage to the deck, not at the blood that was still spreading across the floor. They were staring at the human, at the creature who had held up a piece of industrial machinery, who had shifted the weight of 40 tons, who had bled and pushed and refused to die. Voss's bioluminescence had gone completely dark. The Grenthon foreman was standing motionless, his massive hands hanging at his sides, his armored hide suddenly looking less like protection and more like an admission of vulnerability. The Sealand technician was trembling. His species was known for their emotional control, their ability to remain calm under any circumstances. But he was trembling, his delicate fingers twitching at his sides, his compound eyes fixed on Wyatt with an expression that looked almost like worship. And the small, fragile creature that had been pinned next to Mira, the one Arisht didn't recognize, was crying. Silent tears running down a face that had never seen violence, that had never known a world where survival required you to become something hard and terrible. Arisht stood up. His fractured manipulator was swelling, the bone beneath the carapace grinding together with every movement. He ignored it. He walked to where Wyatt was still kneeling, still holding Mira's hand, still bleeding onto the deck. "You need medical attention," Arisht said. "Both of you." Wyatt looked up at him. His eyes were bloodshot. The capillaries burst from the pressure, but they were still clear, still thinking, still calculating. "Patch her first," he said. "She has crush injuries, vascular damage, possible nerve death. She needs a surgical suite and a regeneration tank. Then get her one." Arisht hesitated. "And you?" Wyatt looked down at his own body, at the shredded shoulders, the abraded shoulders, the arm that was definitely broken in at least 2 places, at the blood that was still flowing from his nose, slower now, clotting at the edges. "I'll wait," he said. "I've got time." Arisht wanted to argue. He wanted to point out that no one had time after holding up 12 tons of machinery. He wanted to scream that the human's internal injuries had to be catastrophic, that his organs had to be bleeding, that his spine had to be compressed almost to the point of fracture. But he looked at Wyatt's face, and he saw something that stopped the words in his throat. The human wasn't being brave. He wasn't being heroic. He wasn't making a noble sacrifice or demonstrating some higher moral principle. He was just tired. Tired in a way that Arisht had never seen before. Tired in a way that suggested this wasn't the first time, that it would never be the last time. That somewhere along the line, on a distant death world under a hostile sun, humans had learned that there was no point in complaining about pain, because pain was just part of the job. "Okay," Arisht said. "Okay." He turned to the crew. They were still frozen, still processing what they had witnessed. He understood. He was processing it too. But someone had to move. Someone had to act. "You," he said, pointing at the Xylan technician. "Get a stretcher. Now, you," he pointed at one of the Grenthon loaders, "clear a path to the medical bay. You," he pointed at Voss, "get me a regeneration tank. I don't care if you have to wake the captain and break every regulation in the book. I need a tank." The crew scattered. They moved with purpose now, their fear transmuted into action. It was the oldest trick in the book. Give terrified people something to do, and they stop being terrified long enough to do it. Arisht knelt beside Mira. Her legs were a mess. The scanner he'd retrieved from his kit was showing fractures in both femurs, extensive soft tissue damage, and compromised blood flow to her lower extremities. But she was alive. Her heart was beating, her lungs were drawing air, and she was still holding Wyatt's hand. "You're going to be fine," Arisht said. He wasn't sure if he was talking to her or to himself. "We have the technology. We can rebuild the tissue. It will take time, but you'll walk again." Mira's eyes flicked to him. "I know," she said. "This isn't my first crush." Arisht's hearts both stopped. Not her first crush. Not her first time having her legs crushed by industrial machinery. Not her first time bleeding out on a cargo bay deck while another human held up the thing that was trying to kill her. "How many times?" he asked. Mira smiled. It was a thin, tired smile, the kind of smile that had seen too much and expected even more. "You don't want to know," she said. The medical bay was crowded. Arisht had never seen so many species in one place without violence breaking out. Grenthon, Xylan, 3 different varieties of bipedal reptilians, a floating gas bag from the Cygnus arm whose name Arisht couldn't pronounce, and at least a dozen others he didn't recognize. They filled the waiting area, spilled out into the corridor, clustered around the door like moths drawn to a flame, or maybe like prey animals watching a predator. Wyatt was in the treatment room. Arisht had finally gotten him onto a table after Mira had been stabilized and moved to the regeneration suite. The human's injuries were exactly as bad as Arisht had feared. Fractured clavicles, a broken humerus, 3 cracked ribs, extensive soft tissue damage to both shoulders, and a mild concussion from where his head had struck the loader's housing during the initial collapse. But the scanner was showing something else, something that made Arisht forget how to breathe. The human's body was already repairing itself, not healing, repairing. The fractured bones were knitting together at a rate that should have been impossible. The soft tissue damage was closing, new cells proliferating so fast that Arisht could watch the wounds shrink in real time. The metabolic rate had increased by nearly 200%, and the human's core temperature had risen to what should have been a fatal fever. "You're burning through your own body," Arisht said. "This isn't healing. This is cannibalism. You're consuming your own reserves to fuel the repair." Wyatt was lying on the table, his eyes half closed, his breathing slow and regular. He looked like he was sleeping, but his jaw was still clenched, and his good hand was gripping the edge of the table hard enough to leave dents in the metal. "That's how it works," he said. "We break down the non-essential stuff first. Fat reserves, muscle. If it's bad enough, we start on the organs." "Your organs?" "Yeah. The body prioritizes. Heart and brain come first. Everything else is negotiable Arisht sat down heavily on the stool next to the table. His fractured manipulator was throbbing, and his primary heart was still racing, and every part of him was screaming for rest. But he couldn't look away from the scanner, couldn't stop watching the impossible data scroll across his retinal display. "Your species shouldn't exist," he said. Wyatt opened his eyes. "Probably not." "I mean it. The Galactic Medical Exchange has records on over 40,000 carbon-based species. None of them have your biology, none of them have your regenerative capacity. None of them have your tolerance for trauma. You're an outlier, a statistical impossibility. Every principle of evolutionary biology says you should have gone extinct before you developed language." "We almost did," Wyatt said. "Several times." He shifted on the table, wincing as the movement pulled at his healing fractures. The scanner showed the bone ends grinding together, the new tissues stretching and tearing, then immediately beginning to repair itself again. "The ice ages," he continued. "The supervolcanoes, the asteroid impacts, the plagues, the wars. We almost died out so many times that we stopped counting. But every time, the ones who survived were the ones who could take the most punishment, the ones who could keep going when everything else fell apart." He looked at Arisht. His eyes were still bloodshot, still ringed with exhaustion, but there was something else in them now, something that looked almost like pride. "You're looking at 30,000 generations of survivors," Wyatt said. "Every single one of my ancestors lived through something that should have killed them. Every single one passed down the ability to do it again. That's what we are, Doc. We're the ones who didn't die." Arisht was quiet for a long time. The medbay light was still buzzing. The crowd outside the door was still murmuring. Somewhere in the distance, the ship's engines hummed their steady subsonic song. Life continued. It always continued. "The metal in your blood," Arisht said finally. "The iron. Is that why you came to me? You knew I would find it." Wyatt shook his head. "I came to you because I needed a patch job. The iron is just how we work. But you knew. When I scanned you, you knew what I would see. I knew you'd see something you didn't expect. I didn't know it would scare you." Arisht looked down at his own manipulators, at the blood that was still crusted on them. Human blood, heavy with iron and history and survival. He thought about the genetic scars he had seen in the scanner, the ancient battles written into every cell. He thought about the retroviruses that had been absorbed, the viral fragments that had become tools. He thought about a species that had turned its own attackers into allies, that had repurposed everything that had ever tried to kill it. "You're not a patient," Arisht said. "You're a warming." Wyatt's lips twitched, almost a smile. "We get that a lot." The door opened. Voss stood in the frame, his bioluminescence still dark, his massive frame somehow smaller than it had been before. He looked at Wyatt, then he looked at Arisht, then he looked at the scanner, at the data still scrolling across the display. "The captain wants a report," Voss said. "He wants to know what happened." "A loader assembly failed," Arisht said. 3 workers were pinned. 1 worker held up the assembly long enough for extraction. Voss's spots flickered, a pattern Arisht had never seen before, something between fear and awe, and something else entirely. "That's not what happened," the foreman said. "That's what we're going to tell him. But that's not what happened." Arisht waited. Voss stepped into the room. He moved carefully now, his heavy footsteps deliberately placed, as if he was afraid of breaking something. He stopped at the foot of Wyatt's table and looked down at the human. "You lifted 40 tons, Voss said. You lifted it, and you held it, and you walked with it. No species in this galaxy can do that. No species. I've worked with Grenthon, who could bench press a small vehicle, and they couldn't do what you did. Wyatt said nothing. The captain will want to know why. He'll want to understand. He'll send reports to the exchange, and the exchange will send researchers, and before long, every scientist in this sector will be knocking on our door asking for samples of your blood. Let them ask, Wyatt said. They won't ask. They'll take. Wyatt's good hand tightened on the edge of the table, the metal dented further. Then they'll learn, he said, the hard way. Voss's spots flickered again. The pattern was clearer now. Fear, yes, but also understanding. A recognition that something fundamental had changed, that the universe was larger and stranger and more dangerous than he had ever imagined. I'm going to recommend that you be transferred off this ship, Voss said. You and the other human, for your safety. For yours, Wyatt said. Voss didn't deny it. He turned and walked out of the medbay, his heavy footsteps fading into the corridor. The crowd outside parted to let him through, then closed again, their eyes still fixed on the treatment room. Arisht stood up. His fractured manipulator was going to need attention, real attention, not the kind that humans called good enough. But first, there was something he needed to know. The other human, he said. Mira, is she? She's human, Wyatt said. Same as me. No, I mean, is she with you? Are you bonded? Something passed behind his eyes, memory maybe, or loss, or something else entirely. We're crew, he said. That's all. Arisht didn't believe him, but he also knew better than to push. He moved to the cabinet on the far wall and retrieved a regen patch, the strongest one he had, the kind reserved for emergencies. He applied it to Wyatt's broken arm, watching as the synthetic tissue bonded with the human's skin, watching as the body immediately began breaking it down and rebuilding it into something that matched its own impossible biology. You're going to be fine, Arisht said. In about 12 hours, the fractures will be stabilized. In 24, you'll have full mobility. In 48, you'll be back to baseline. Wyatt nodded. Good. I've got a shift on the loading dock tomorrow. Arisht stared at him. You're going back to work. I'm going back to work. After what just happened? After you almost died. Wyatt sat up on the table. His movements were slow, careful, but there was no hesitation. He swung his legs over the side and planted his boots on the deck. The regen patch on his arm was already warming, the synthetic tissue knitting together with his flesh. Doc, he said, I've almost died more times than you've treated patients. That's not a tragedy. That's just Tuesday. He stood up. He swayed for a moment, his body adjusting to the strain, then steadied himself. His jumpsuit was still shredded, his shoulders were still raw. His face was still streaked with dried blood, but he was standing. Arisht watched him walk to the door. The crowd outside parted again, wider this time, leaving a clear path to the corridor. They didn't look at Wyatt, they couldn't. They stared at the floor, at the walls, at anything but the creature moving among them. Wyatt paused at the door. He turned back, just for a moment. Thanks for the patch job, he said. Then he was gone. Arisht stood alone in the medbay, surrounded by scanners and surgical tools and the faint smell of burnt hair and industrial bleach. The light fixture was still buzzing. The ship's engines were still humming. Somewhere in the distance, a human was walking back to work. He sat down on the stool. He thought about the scanner's readout, about the iron in the blood, the cholesterol in the cell walls, the viral scars in the genome, about a species that had evolved on a death world under crushing gravity and a hostile sun, that had survived ice ages and plagues and wars, that had turned its own biology into a weapon and its own pain into fuel. He thought about 40 tons of industrial machinery held up by 2 shoulders and a broken arm. He thought about a man who called survival just Tuesday, and he realized, with a clarity that felt like drowning, that the Galactic Medical Exchange had gotten it wrong. Earth wasn't a class. 1, 2, Death World because of its gravity or its atmosphere or its predators. Earth was a death world because of what crawled out of it. Arisht looked down at his own manipulators, at the blood that was still crusted on them, iron-heavy, impossible, terrifying. He didn't wash it off. He wasn't sure he ever would. He didn't wash it off. He wasn't sure he ever would. The medbay light buzzed its dying wasp song. Arisht sat on the stool for a long time, his fractured manipulator resting in his lap, his 3 good appendages folded across his thorax. The blood had dried now, cracked and dark, flaking off in small pieces whenever he moved. Human blood, death world blood, the blood of something that should not exist. His scanner was still running. He hadn't turned it off. He hadn't moved it from the table where Wyatt had lain, still warm from the human's body heat, still dented from the grip of his hand. The display was cycling through the data now, looping through the impossibilities, trying to find some pattern that made sense. It wouldn't. Arisht knew this because he had spent the last hour doing the same thing, running the numbers, checking the calculations, trying to find the error, the misinterpretation, the simple mistake that would explain everything. There was no mistake. The human's bone density was 3.7 times the galactic average. His muscle fiber composition included structures that Arisht had never seen before. Fast-twitch variants that shouldn't be possible in a carbon-based organism, slow-twitch fibers that could sustain effort for days. His nervous system was wired with a myelin sheath that conducted signals at nearly 100 meters per second. And his pain receptors were connected to a feedback loop that could suppress or amplify signals depending on context. He could choose to feel pain, or he could choose not to. Arisht had seen that in the data and had almost laughed. It was absurd. Pain was a warming system, an evolutionary necessity. You couldn't just turn it off. That would be like disabling the pressure alerts on a failing reactor. Suicidal, irrational, completely counter to survival. But that was the point, wasn't it? Humans didn't survive because they avoided danger. Humans survived because they walked into danger and came out the other side. They didn't need pain warnings because they already knew everything was trying to kill them. They didn't need fear responses because fear was just another data point, another input to be processed and ignored. They had evolved past the need for self-preservation, or rather, they had evolved a different kind of self-preservation, one that didn't involve running away, one that involved standing still while 40 tons of machinery pressed down on your shoulders because someone else was trapped underneath and running wasn't an option. The door hissed open. Arisht didn't look up. He knew who it was by the sound of the footsteps. Light, careful, deliberately quiet. Not a Grenthon, not a Zillan, not any of the other species on the crew. Human. Mira stood in the doorway. She was wearing a medical gown, standard issue, too short for her legs, too loose around her shoulders. Her hair was still matted with blood, and there were dark circles under her eyes that spoke of pain and exhaustion, and something else, something that looked like anger. "You're supposed to be in the regeneration tank," Arisht said. "I got out." "You can't just get out." "Your legs—" "My legs are fine." She stepped into the room. Her gait was uneven, favoring her right side, but she was walking. Walking, less than 2 hours after having her legs crushed under 10 tons of industrial machinery. The tank did its job. "I'll be sore for a few days, but the bones are set and the tissue is regenerated." Arisht stared at her. "That's not possible. It's human." She stopped at the table where Wyatt had lain and ran her fingers over the dents in the metal. "Where is he? Your crewmate?" "He went back to work." Mira's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind her eyes. A calculation. An assessment. The same kind of rapid, unconscious processing that Arisht had seen in Wyatt when he was holding up the loader. Which bay? "The loading dock." He said he had a shift. "He's an idiot." She turned toward the door. "But he's our idiot. Thanks for patching him up." "Mira." Arisht stood up, his fractured manipulator sending a spike of pain through his arm. He ignored it. He was learning to ignore things. "I need to ask you something." Didn't turn around. "Your species? Your biology? The things I saw in the scanner? The iron, the cellular reinforcement, the viral integrations. How?" Mira was quiet for a long moment. The light buzzed. The ship hummed. Somewhere in the distance, a cargo loader whined and groaned. "You want the short version or the long version?" she asked. "The truth." She turned. Her face was young, younger than Wyatt's, smoother, less lined, but her eyes were old, ancient even. The same ancient exhaustion that Arisht had seen in Wyatt, the same bone-deep weariness that came from surviving things that should have killed you. "We're from a death world," she said. "You know that. Class 1-2, the highest rating on the scale. But the rating system doesn't tell the whole story. It doesn't tell you about the bacteria. The bacteria, Earth is covered in them. Trillions of them. They're in the soil, the water, the air. They're inside every living thing, and they're aggressive. They evolve fast, faster than anything else on the planet. A single bacterium can reproduce every 20 minutes. In a day, it can generate more generations than we've had since we climbed down from the trees." Arisht's primary heart began to beat faster. He had seen bacterial infections before. He had treated them. They were dangerous, yes, but manageable, controllable. A species with advanced medicine could— "You can't control them," Mira said, as if reading his thoughts. "You can't even slow them down. They adapt to antibiotics within years, sometimes months. Every time we developed a new weapon, they evolved around it. We spent centuries playing catch-up, and we were losing. But you're still here. We're still here." She moved to the cabinet on the far wall and leaned against it, taking the weight off her healing legs. "Because we stopped fighting them. We started incorporating them." Arisht's scanner beeped. He ignored it. "The viral fragments in your genome," he said. "The retroviral insertions. You're not just carrying ancient infections, you're carrying active ones. Active and functional. The bacteria on Earth, the ones that didn't kill us, they became part of us. They live in our guts, our skin, our blood. They help us digest food, regulate our immune systems, even influence our moods. We're not a single species, Doc. We're an ecosystem, a walking, talking collection of trillions of organisms, all working together to keep the whole thing from falling apart." Arisht sat down heavily on the stool. His fractured manipulator was forgotten. His hearts were racing. His mind was struggling to process what he was hearing. "You're a symbiotic collective," he said. "We're a nightmare," Mira corrected. "That's what they call us. The species that couldn't be killed because we wouldn't stay dead. The species that ate its own predators and turned its diseases into tools. We're not the strongest or the fastest. We're just the hardest to get rid of." She pushed off from the cabinet and walked toward the door again. Her gait was steadier now, the regeneration tank doing its work faster than Arisht's medical training said was possible. "Where are you going?" he asked. "To find Wyatt. To make sure he doesn't do something even stupider than holding up a loader. He saved your life." "He did, and now I'm going to save his." She paused at the door, her hand on the frame. "One more thing, Doc. The iron in our blood, the thing that scared you so much. Do you want to know why we use it?" Arisht nodded. He wasn't sure he wanted to know, but he needed to. "Because it's everywhere," Mira said. "On Earth, iron is the most common heavy metal. It's in the rocks, the soil, the water. It's in the blood of every animal that ever lived. Using it was never a choice. It was the only option. We adapted to what was available, and what was available was poison." She looked at him over her shoulder. Her eyes were dark, almost black in the buzzing light. "Everything on Earth is poison, Doc. The air, the water, the soil, the food, everything is trying to kill you, and we evolved in that environment for billions of years. We didn't survive because we were strong. We survived because we were toxic." She left. The door closed behind her, and Arisht was alone again with his scanner and his thoughts, and the dried blood on his manipulators. The loading dock was chaos. Arisht had followed Mira at a distance, his medical training warring with his survival instincts. The survival instincts were winning. Every step toward the cargo bay felt like a step toward something dangerous, something that should be observed from a safe distance, not experienced firsthand. But the medical training was still there, whispering about duty and responsibility and the oath he had taken when he joined the Galactic Medical Exchange. He was a healer. He healed. And right now there were 2 humans on this ship who needed healing, even if they didn't know it. The cargo bay doors were open. Arisht stepped through them and into chaos. The loader assembly had been moved, or rather, what was left of it had been moved. The damaged leg had been severed at the hydraulic joint and dragged to the side of the bay, where a team of technicians were examining it with the kind of focused intensity that came from knowing a full investigation was coming. The deck was scarred, deep gouges cut into the metal by the loader's final descent. The blood had been cleaned up, mostly, but Arisht could still see the stains, dark against the grey flooring. And in the center of it all, standing on a shipping container and shouting orders at a crew of loaders, was Wyatt. He had changed his jumpsuit. The new one was clean, unripped, zipped up to the throat. His arm was wrapped in a regen patch, the one Arisht had applied, but other than that, there was no sign that he had been injured at all. He was moving freely, gesturing with both arms, his voice carrying across the bay with the easy authority of someone who had been doing this job for years. "Stack the containers 3 high, not 4. The locking mechanisms can't handle the lateral stress in low G, and someone get me a pressure reading on the secondary hydraulics. I want to know why that leg failed." The loaders moved. They didn't question, they didn't hesitate. They just moved, carrying out his orders with a speed and precision that spoke of respect or fear. Arisht wasn't sure which. Mira was already climbing the container. She moved carefully, still favoring her right leg, but there was no hesitation in her ascent. She reached the top and stood next to Wyatt, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "You should be in the tank," Wyatt said without looking at her. "So should you." "I had a shift. You had a concussion and a broken arm and about a dozen other injuries that should have put you in the med bay for a week." Wyatt turned to look at her. His face was tired. More tired than it had been in the med bay somehow, but there was something else there too, something that looked almost like relief. "Glad you're okay," he said. "I'm fine. You're an idiot." He turned back to the cargo bay, surveying the damage. "But I'm an idiot with a shift to finish. You want to help, or just stand there judging me." Mira uncrossed her arms. "What do you need?" "They won't go near the damaged section. I need someone to check the hydraulic pressure on the remaining legs, make sure the stabilizers are holding." "I can do that." "You sure? Your legs are fine. I've worked through worse." Wyatt nodded. He didn't argue. He didn't offer to do it himself. He just nodded, as if her answer was exactly what he had expected. Arisht watched from the entrance as Mira climbed down from the container and made her way toward the damaged loader. The other workers gave her a wide berth, their eyes tracking her movements with the same mixture of fear and fascination that Arisht had seen in the medbay. They knew what she was, what they both were, and it had changed everything. Foreman Voss appeared at Arisht's side. The Grenthan's bioluminescence was still dark, not flickering, not cycling, just dark, the emotional equivalent of a flat line. "Doctor," Voss said, "I didn't expect to see you here. I wanted to check on my patients. Your patients are working, I noticed." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the activity in the cargo bay. The loaders were moving faster now, their fear transmuted into efficiency. Containers were being stacked, the damaged leg was being examined, and Mira was crawling under the loader's remaining legs with a pressure gauge in her hand. "The captain wants a full report," Voss said. "He's already contacted the exchange. They're sending a research team." Arisht's heart clenched. How long? Maybe 4. And the humans? What happens to them? Voss's bioluminescence flickered, just once, a brief pulse of something that might have been guilt. "The captain wants them off the ship before the researchers arrive. He's arranged for a transport to pick them up at the next way station." "You're hiding them." "We're protecting them. The exchange doesn't have a good track record with outlier species. They study first and ask questions later, usually while the subject is still alive." Arisht thought about the scanner data, about the iron in the blood, the viral integrations, the impossible biology. He thought about what the exchange would do with that information, how they would dissect it, analyze it, turn it into weapons or medicine or something in between. "You're right to hide them," he said. "But they won't go." Voss turned to look at him. "What do you mean?" Arisht nodded toward the cargo bay, where Wyatt was still standing on the container, still shouting orders, still working like nothing had happened. "They're not the kind of species that runs," he said. "They're not the kind of species that hides. They're the kind of species that stands still while the world falls down around them because someone else is trapped underneath." Voss's bioluminescence flickered again, longer this time. The pattern was almost recognizable. Fear, yes, but also resignation, the acceptance of something inevitable. "The transport arrives in 4 days," he said. "If they won't go willingly, I can't force them." "No," Arisht agreed. "You can't." He walked into the cargo bay. The loaders parted for him the same way they had parted for Wyatt. He was smaller than most of them, more fragile, but something about his purpose must have shown on his face, because they didn't question him. They just moved. Wyatt saw him coming. The human's expression didn't change, still tired, still focused, but his eyes tracked Arisht's approach with the same unconscious calculation that Mira had shown. "Doc," he said, "you're a long way from your med bay. I'm exactly where I need to be." Arisht stopped at the base of the container and looked up. "There's something I need to tell you about the exchange, about what's coming." Wyatt's jaw tightened. "I know what's coming. It's always the same. Someone sees what we can do, and they want to take us apart to figure out how it works. This time is different. They're sending a research team, full credentials. They'll have authority to detain you for study. Let them try." Mira said the same thing. "But you don't understand. The exchange has resources. They have influence. If they decide you're a threat or an opportunity, they won't stop until they have you." Wyatt jumped down from the container. He landed lightly, his boots barely making a sound on the deck. The regen patch on his arm caught the light, pale against his skin, already starting to break down and be absorbed. "Doc," he said, "I've been studied before. We both have. Every species we've ever worked with, every alien we've ever encountered, they all want to know the same thing. How do you survive? How do you keep going? How do you lift 40 tons when your body should be crushed?" He stepped closer. Up close, Arisht could see the damage that the regen patch hadn't yet healed. The burst capillaries in his eyes, the raw skin on his shoulders, the slight tremor in his hands. "And every time," Wyatt continued, "we tell them the same thing. We survive because we have to. We keep going because stopping means dying. And we lift 40 tons because someone else is underneath." He looked out across the cargo bay, at the loaders moving containers, at the technicians examining the damaged leg, at Mira crawling under the machinery with her pressure gauge. "You want to know the secret to humanity?" he asked. "There isn't one. We're not smarter or stronger or faster. We're just too stubborn to die." Arisht believed him. He also believed that the exchange wouldn't care. They would come with their scammers and their questions and their authority, and they would try to take the humans apart. And the humans would resist, and people would get hurt. 4 days, Arisht said. "The transport arrives in 4 days. If you want to leave before the researchers get here, that's your window." Wyatt nodded slowly. 4 days. That's enough time. Enough time for what? The humans smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the kind of smile that Arisht had seen on the faces of soldiers before a battle, or surgeons before a difficult operation. The kind of smile that said, "I know something you don't." "Enough time to finish my shift," Wyatt said, "and then we'll see what happens." He turned and walked back toward the loader, leaving Arisht standing alone in the middle of the cargo bay. The loaders moved around him, giving him space, their eyes flicking between him and the humans who were still working, still moving, still refusing to stop. Arisht looked down at his manipulators. The blood was still there, dried, cracked, flaking. Human blood, iron blood, the blood of something that should not exist. He didn't wash it off. He walked back to the med bay, and he didn't wash it off. 3 days passed. Arisht spent them in a state of controlled tension, moving between his duties and the cargo bay, watching the humans work and waiting for the other shoe to drop. The research team was coming. The exchange had confirmed it, a full delegation led by a senior xenobiologist named Thren, who had a reputation for aggressive methodology and a complete lack of ethical boundaries. The crew knew. Word had spread through the ship like a virus, infecting every conversation, every meal, every shift change. The humans were marked. The exchange was coming, and no one knew what to do about it. On the third day, Arisht found Mira sitting alone in the observation deck. The observation deck was a small room at the front of the ship, with a curved window that looked out onto the stars. It was supposed to be a place of contemplation, of peace, of quiet reflection. But Mira wasn't reflecting. She was staring at the wall, her legs stretched out in front of her, her hands resting on her thighs. "You should be resting," Arisht said as he entered. "I should be doing a lot of things." She didn't look at him. "The transport arrives tomorrow." "I know. The research team is already on board. They're running scans from long range, trying to get a baseline before they even set foot on the ship." Arisht sat down next to her. The chair was designed for a different species, too low, too wide, but he made it work. "How do you know that?" Wyatt told me. "He can feel it." "Feel what?" "The scans, the radiation. Humans are sensitive to certain frequencies, the ones that mess with our cells. We've been getting headaches for the past 6 hours, low-grade, constant, like someone drilling into the back of our skulls." Arisht's primary heart stuttered. "They're scanning you, remotely, without consent." "Yeah." Mira finally turned to look at him. Her eyes were red-rimmed, tired, but there was no fear in them. Just that same ancient exhaustion. That's what researchers do. They don't ask. They take. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. It's not your fault." She looked back at the wall. "Wyatt wants to fight." "Fight?" "Not physically. Not yet. He wants to stay. Wants to make a stand." "Show them that we're not specimens to be studied, but I think running might be smarter." "Which do you want to do?" Mira was quiet for a long time. The observation deck was silent, except for the low hum of the ship's engines and the distant thrum of the stars outside. "I want to go home," she said finally. "I want to go back to Earth, where the air is poison and the water is poison, and everything is trying to kill me. Because at least there, I know the rules. At least there, I'm not a freak. I'm just human." Arisht didn't know what to say to that. He didn't know how to comfort a creature who had evolved on a world that wanted her dead. He didn't know how to tell her that she wasn't a freak, that she was beautiful, that the iron in her blood and the scars in her genome were proof of something miraculous. So he said nothing. He just sat next to her in the too low chair and watched the stars. After a while she spoke again. "Can I ask you something, Doc?" "Of course." "The iron in our blood. When you saw it, when the scanner showed you, what did you feel?" Arisht thought about it. He thought about the terror, the awe, the sense of standing on the edge of something vast and unknowable. He thought about the way his hearts had stuttered, and his manipulators had trembled, and his mind had refused to accept what his eyes were seeing. "Fear," he said. "I felt fear." Mira nodded slowly. "Good, good. Fear means you understand. Fear means you're paying attention." She stood up, wincing slightly as her healing legs took her weight. "The ones who aren't afraid, they're the ones who get hurt. They're the ones who try to take us apart, who think they can control us." "Who don't realize that we've been surviving impossible things since before their species evolved language. She walked to the door, paused, looked back at him. The research team tomorrow, she said. They're going to be afraid at first, but then they're going to be curious, and curiosity is dangerous. It makes you forget to be afraid. She left. Arisht sat alone in the observation deck, staring at the wall where she had been sitting, thinking about fear and curiosity and the difference between the two. He didn't wash the blood off his manipulators. He was starting to think he never would. The transport arrived on schedule. Arisht watched from the observation deck as it docked, a sleek black vessel that looked more like a weapon than a ship. It was exchange property, he knew, designed for speed and discretion, capable of carrying a full research team and all their equipment to any corner of the galaxy. The docking clamps engaged, the airlock cycled, and 12 beings stepped onto the GMS Relentless. Arisht had seen the research team's credentials. He had read their names, their specialties, their publication histories. He knew what they were capable of. But knowing and seeing were different experiences, separated by the same vast gulf that had separated him from Wyatt's scanner data. The team was led by Thren, a tall, thin creature from a high-gravity world with 4 arms and a face that seemed to be made entirely of angles. His species, the Veth, were known for their analytical minds and their complete lack of emotional affect. They didn't feel fear or curiosity or awe. They just processed data. Behind him came a dozen assistants, a mix of species, all of them carrying scanners and sample kits, and the kind of cold, clinical efficiency that Arisht had learned to recognize. They weren't here to help. They weren't here to heal. They were here to collect. Captain Rel of the Relentless met them at the airlock. Arisht watched from the observation deck as the 2 leaders exchanged formal greetings, the captain's bioluminescence flickering with tension, Thren's angular face betraying nothing. The subjects, Thren said. His voice was flat, mechanical, stripped of any inflection that might suggest emotion. Where are they? Captain Rel's spots flickered faster. They're not subjects, they're crew members, and they're in the cargo bay, working. Thren's head tilted slightly. It was the first sign of anything resembling human expression that Arisht had seen from him. They were injured 3 days ago. Severe crush trauma. They should be in medical observation. They're humans. I'm aware of their species. That's why we're here. Thren gestured to his assistants, who began moving toward the cargo bay with the kind of coordinated efficiency that spoke of practice. I'll need access to your medical records, all scanner data, and I'll need to interview the crew, especially anyone who witnessed the incident. Captain Rel's bioluminescence went dark. The crew is busy. We have a schedule to maintain. The exchange has authorized me to override your schedule. This is a priority investigation. Arisht left the observation deck and made his way toward the cargo bay. He didn't run. Running would suggest urgency, and urgency would suggest fear, and he didn't want to give Thren the satisfaction. But he walked quickly, his fractured manipulator still throbbing, his heart still racing. The cargo bay was already occupied. Thren's assistants had arrived before him. They were spread out across the bay, their scanners humming, their sample kits open and ready. They were collecting data, atmospheric samples, deck scrapings, residue from the hydraulic fluid that had leaked from the damaged leg. They were thorough. They were methodical. They were treating the cargo bay like a crime scene. And in the center of it all, standing on the same shipping container where he had stood 3 days ago, was Wyatt. He wasn't working. The loaders had stopped, frozen in place by the arrival of the research team, their eyes tracking the assistants with the same mixture of fear and fascination that Arisht had seen before. But Wyatt wasn't frozen. He was watching, calculating. The same unconscious assessment that Arisht had seen in the medbay, the same rapid processing of threats and opportunities. Mira was at the base of the container, her arms crossed, her expression carefully blank. She was watching, too. Thren entered the cargo bay. The assistants parted for him the same way the loaders had parted for Wyatt. But where the loaders had parted out of respect, the assistants parted out of deference. Thren was their leader, their director, their authority. He stopped in front of the container and looked up at Wyatt. "You are the human designated as Wyatt," Thren said. It wasn't a question. Wyatt didn't answer. He just looked down at the Veth, his storm cloud eyes unreadable. "I am Thren of the Galactic Medical Exchange. I am here to conduct a standard biological assessment of your species. You will submit to scanning and sampling. You will answer my questions. You will not resist." Still no answer. Wyatt's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air between them, a tension, a pressure, a sense that something was about to happen. Thren's head tilted again. "You are not complying." "I'm not doing anything," Wyatt said. His voice was calm, flat, the same mechanical lack of inflection that Thren had used. "I'm just standing here. Your lack of response is itself a response. You are choosing not to cooperate. I'm choosing to finish my shift." Wyatt stepped to the edge of the container. He didn't jump down, not yet. He just stood there, looking down at the Veth with those ancient, exhausted eyes. "You have 4 hours before the Relentless reaches the next way station. That's when my shift ends. You can talk to me then." "The Exchange has authorized." "I don't care what the Exchange has authorized." Wyatt's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The words carried across the cargo bay with a weight that made the assistants freeze, made the loaders hold their breath, made Arisht's hearts stop. "I'm not a subject. I'm not a specimen. I'm a worker on a cargo ship, and I have a job to do. You can wait." Thren was silent for a long moment. His angular face betrayed nothing, but his 4 arms moved, a subtle gesture that Arisht recognized as a sign of agitation in Veth physiology. "The human designated as Mira," Thren said. "She will submit to scanning now." Mira uncrossed her arms. "No, I won't. Your refusal is noted. It will be included in my report to the Exchange. I'm sure it will." Thren turned to his assistants. "Begin environmental sampling. I want a full atmospheric analysis, deck composition, and residue identification. We'll collect biological samples when the subjects are more cooperative." The assistants moved. The scanners hummed. The cargo bay filled with the sound of data being collected, evidence being gathered, a case being built. Wyatt watched, Mira watched, and Arisht watched them both, thinking about fear and curiosity and the difference between the two. The research team had made a mistake. They had come onto the ship with their scanners and their authority and their cold clinical efficiency. They had treated the humans like specimens, like data points, like problems to be solved. They had forgotten to be afraid. Arisht hadn't forgotten. He looked down at his manipulators. The blood was still there, dried, cracked, almost invisible against his carapace. Human blood, iron blood, the blood of something that should not exist. He didn't wash it off.